The Young and the Restless recap Thurdays. Full episodes the 18th of March 2026. The sprawling corner office of Summers Conglomerate smelled of expensive leather, fresh orchids, and the intoxicating metallic tang of raw ambition. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic god's-eye view of Genoa City, a metropolis where power shifted like sand dunes in a hurricane. Standing before the glass, bathed in the late afternoon sunlight, was Phyllis Summers. Her fiery red hair cascaded over the shoulders of a sharply tailored emerald green blazer, a physical manifestation of her renewed vitality. She turned a crystal decanter in one hand and two heavy highball glasses in the other, a triumphant smile playing on her lips. Seated across from the sprawling mahogany desk was Lauren Fenmore Baldwin. Always the picture of sartorial perfection, Lauren wore a sleek charcoal gray sheath dress, her legs crossed at the ankle, her posture impeccably straight. She watched Phyllis with the calm predatory stillness of a seasoned hawk, observing a very bright, very erratic hummingbird. "I'm telling you, Lauren, this is it," Phyllis declared, her voice vibrating with a manic, infectious energy. She poured a generous measure of aged bourbon into both glasses, the amber liquid catching the light. Summers Conglomerate isn't just a holding company, it is a disruptor. We are going to pivot from the traditional tech acquisitions and move aggressively into lifestyle, fashion, and global distribution. And that, my dearest friend, is exactly where you come in. Phyllis crossed the expanse of the room, her heels clicking a staccato rhythm against the polished hardwood floor, and handed Lauren a glass. "I am offering you the position of Chief Operating Officer," Phyllis continued, leaning against the edge of her desk, her eyes wide and gleaming. "A direct partnership. You and me, Lauren, side by side. We'll integrate the Fenmore brand's prestige with Summers Conglomerate's digital infrastructure. I have the capital, I have the servers, and I have the drive. You have the legacy, the connections, and the retail acumen. Together, we would be an absolute juggernaut. We would dictate the market. We would be untouchable." Lauren accepted the glass, the cool crystal, grounding her against the onslaught of Phyllis's pitch. She took a slow, deliberate sip, letting the burn of the bourbon coat her throat as she studied the woman before her. On paper, it was a magnificent proposition. Phyllis was a visionary, a woman who had clawed her way back from the brink of destruction more times than anyone in Genoa City could count. But that was precisely the problem. As Lauren looked at Phyllis's eager, almost desperate expression, a cascade of internal warnings flared to life. Phyllis was a survivor, yes, but she was also a walking inferno. Where Phyllis went, chaos inevitably followed. Lauren thought of her husband Michael and his constant weary warnings about Phyllis's reckless maneuvers. She thought of the countless times Phyllis had allowed her vendettas, her insecurities, and her volatile emotions to detonate her professional endeavors. Aligning publicly with Phyllis Summers was akin to building a luxury condominium on the slopes of an active volcano. It was thrilling, it was lucrative, but it was fundamentally unstable. Furthermore, Lauren knew that Phyllis had just engaged in a high-stakes, incredibly messy negotiation with Victor Newman. Phyllis had been forced to surrender Chancellor to the Newman patriarch to secure Jack Abbott's freedom. Phyllis claimed it was a victory, a negotiation of equals, but Lauren knew better. You didn't negotiate with Victor Newman, you survived him. If Lauren tied her flagship enterprise to Summers Conglomerate right now, she would be stepping directly into the crosshairs of a very agitated, very dangerous Victor. Phyllis Lauren began her tone measured, smooth, and deliberately devoid of the matching enthusiasm Phyllis so desperately sought. "It is a staggering offer. Truly, the vision you have for this conglomerate is nothing short of brilliant. You have built something remarkable out of thin air, and I am incredibly flattered that you would want me to be your right hand." Phyllis's smile widened her chest, puffing slightly with validation. "So you're in. We can have the legal team draft the contracts by tomorrow morning. I already have a press release drafted." "No," Lauren said softly, cutting through the excitement like a scalpel. Phyllis blinked, the smile freezing on her face before slowly fracturing. No. What do you mean no, Lauren? Did you not just hear the projections I laid out? Are you worried about Michael? Because I can talk to Michael. I can explain the firewall we're building. Michael has nothing to do with this, Lauren interrupted, setting her glass down on the desk with a quiet, definitive clink. She uncrossed her legs and leaned forward, the ambient light catching the sharp, calculating intelligence in her eyes. I am declining the position of COO Phyllis. I cannot and will not work for Summers Conglomerate. The public liability is too high, and frankly, your recent entanglements are too volatile for Fenmore's to absorb. Phyllis recoiled as if she had been physically struck. The emerald blazer suddenly seemed to swallow her as her posture shifted from triumphant to defensive. My entanglements? You mean Victor? You're terrified of Victor. I should have known. Everyone in this town cowers the second the mustache twitches. I stood toe-to-toe with him, Lauren. I beat him at his own game. You survived his game, Lauren corrected sharply, her voice dropping an octave. There is a distinct difference, Phyllis, and your inability to see that is exactly why I will not share a corporate letterhead with you. Phyllis scoffed, turning her back to Lauren and marching toward the window, her arms crossing tightly over her chest. Fine. If you want to play it safe, stay in your lane. Keep selling perfume and cashmere while I take over the world. I don't need you. I didn't say I didn't want to work with you, Lauren said, the words hanging in the tense air between them. Phyllis stopped her reflection in the glass, showcasing a mask of total confusion. She slowly turned around. You literally just said you won't work for Summers Conglomerate. I said I won't work times for times, you, Lauren clarified, rising from her chair with a fluid, predatory grace. She walked toward the center of the room, checking the closed door before turning her piercing gaze back to Phyllis. And I will not do it publicly, but I am proposing something else entirely, something far more lucrative and far more dangerous. Phyllis narrowed her eyes, her defensive posture slipping slightly as her innate curiosity took the reins. I'm listening. Lauren closed the distance between them, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. You are right about one thing, Phyllis. Everyone in this town cowers when it comes to Victor Newman. For decades, that man has dictated the terms of our lives, our businesses, our families. He treats Genoa City like a chessboard, and he views all of us as expendable pawns. He took Chancellor from you. He used Jack's life as leverage. He plays God, and he never ever faces a true reckoning. Tell me something I don't know, Phyllis, muttered, her jaw tightening at the fresh memory of Victor's smug, triumphant smirk. Here is what you don't know, Lauren said, her eyes locking onto Phyllis's. I am sick of it. I am sick of Michael losing sleep over the ethical compromises Victor forces him into. I am sick of watching my friends be collateral damage in the Newman family civil wars. I don't want to join your company, Phyllis. I want to form a secret alliance, you and me, against Victor. Phyllis stared at her, the silence in the room suddenly deafening. For a moment, she thought she had misheard. Lauren Fenmore, the woman who had just lectured her about volatility and public liability, was proposing a covert war against the most ruthless billionaire in the Midwest. You want to take on Victor. Phyllis whispered, her mind racing to catch up with the sheer audacity of the proposition. Lauren, are you out of your mind if he even suspects? He won't suspect, Lauren interjected smoothly, her tone laced with absolute certainty, because publicly we are going to be at odds. Tomorrow, the rumor mill at the Genoa City Athletic Club will hear that we had a massive falling out in this office. You offered me a job, I insulted your business model, and I walked out in a huff. We will maintain a frosty, distant relationship in front of everyone. Michael, Nick, Summer, Chloe, no one can know. Total, absolute secrecy is the only way this works. Phyllis felt a cold thrill wash over her, a potent mixture of adrenaline and genuine shock. She moved away from the window, pacing a tight circle around her desk as she processed the magnitude of the idea. A shadow alliance. To do what, exactly? Key his car. Short Newman Enterprises stock. To dismantle him, Lauren said, the chilling calmness of her voice sending a shiver down Phyllis's spine. to systematically weaken his empire and regain the control he just stole from you. And we are going to do it using the very thing you possess right now, information. Lauren stepped closer, pointing a manicured finger at the desk where Phyllis's encrypted laptop sat. You were inside his perimeter. Phyllis, during the negotiations for Jack, you had access to Victor's current methodologies. You know, which shell companies he used to move the Chancellor assets, you know, the pressure points he utilized to bypass the SEC regulations. You have digital footprints, offshore routing numbers, and firsthand knowledge of his extortion tactics regarding Jack's abduction. Phyllis's breath hitched. Lauren was right. In her desperate scramble to outmaneuver Victor, Phyllis had compiled a massive dossier of Newman's illicit maneuvers. She had planned to use it as an insurance policy, a mutually assured destruction button if Victor ever came after her again. But Lauren wasn't talking about a defensive shield. Lauren was talking about a weapon of mass destruction. You want to weaponize my intel, Phyllis said, her voice barely above a breath. Exactly, Lauren nodded, her eyes flashing with a dangerous, brilliant light. But we can't just leak it to the press. Victor controls half the media and his lawyers would bury the rest. No, we use the information strategically. We feed it to his competitors. We anonymously tip off the regulatory boards precisely when Newman Enterprises is vulnerable. We bleed his subsidiaries dry one by one. I have the capital and the untraceable offshore accounts through my international suppliers to fund the operations. You have the tech infrastructure and the raw data. We orchestrate a series of catastrophic bad luck events for Victor Newman, and he will never see our hands on the knife. Phyllis stopped pacing. She stood completely still, staring at the woman she had known for decades. She had always respected Lauren's business acumen, but she had never fully appreciated the depths of Lauren's ruthlessness. This wasn't just a corporate strategy. This was a blood feud wrapped in silk. As the initial euphoria of the idea settled, a dark, familiar paranoia began to curl in the pit of Phyllis's stomach. She looked at Lauren's perfectly composed face and realized the incredible danger of this proposition. Asterisk, she wants me to be the triggerman times. Phyllis thought the realization hitting her like a physical blow. If this plan worked, they would both reap the benefits. Victor would be crippled, his iron grip on Genoa City shattered, and Phyllis could swoop in to reclaim Chancellor and cement Summers' conglomerate as the reigning superpower. But what if they failed? What if Victor's paranoid security apparatus traced the leaks back to the source? The source wouldn't be Lauren Fenmore. The offshore accounts could be written off as corporate espionage from a rival fashion house. The raw data, the digital footprints, the firsthand knowledge of the extortion, that all pointed directly back to Phyllis. Lauren was proposing a brilliant, devastating war, but she had strategically positioned Phyllis on the absolute front line. If Victor discovered the plot, his wrath would be biblical, and it would fall squarely on Phyllis's shoulders. Lauren could simply feign ignorance, pointing to their public feud as proof that they hadn't spoken in months. Lauren was offering an alliance, but she was also building herself a perfect Phyllis-shaped meat shield. It's a masterpiece, Lauren, Phyllis said, slowly testing the waters, her eyes searching Lauren's face for any micro-expression of betrayal. It really is, but it requires an immense amount of trust. If Victor catches a whiff of this, he won't just sue me. He will obliterate me. He will go after Summer. He will make sure I spend the rest of my life in a federal penitentiary or a psychiatric ward. And you would be perfectly insulated. Lauren didn't flinch. She didn't offer a warm, comforting smile or empty platitudes about friendship. Instead, she offered a look of cold, hard respect. I am taking a massive risk just standing in this room having this conversation, Lauren countered, her voice steady. If Victor finds out I funded this, he will destroy Fenmore's. He will target Michael's career. We are both putting our lives on the line, Phyllis. The difference is I am offering you a chance to actually win the war. You've been losing to him for 20 years. You wanted a partnership. This is what a real partnership looks like at this altitude. It's not about sharing a corner office. It's about sharing the kill. Phyllis walked slowly back to her desk and picked up her bourbon. The ice had melted, diluting the amber liquid, but she drank it anyway. The burn was a welcome distraction from the chaotic whirlwind in her mind. She had to reconsider her entire strategy. When she woke up this morning, her goal had been simple: legitimize Summers' conglomerate, bring Lauren into the fold, and build a conventional empire that would force Genoa City to respect her. She wanted to be the legitimate queen of the corporate world. But Lauren had just ripped up the blueprint and offered her something far darker, far more treacherous, and infinitely more satisfying: to take down Victor Newman, to watch the great patriarch crumble under the weight of his own hubris, orchestrated by the very women he had dismissed and manipulated for decades. It was the ultimate prize. But the cost of failure was total annihilation. Phyllis looked at Lauren, seeing the reflection of her own ambition in the other woman's eyes. This wasn't a job offer anymore. It was a pact with the devil, and Phyllis had to decide if she was willing to sell her soul for the chance to wear the crown. "If we do this," Phyllis said, her voice dropping to a low, gravelly whisper, the silence of the office pressing in around them, "if I agree to this, there is no going back. If Victor finds out, we don't turn on each other, we burn together." Lauren held Phyllis's gaze, her expression unreadable, a sphinx in a cashmere coat. She reached out and picked up her own glass from the desk, raising it slightly in the air. To the shadows, Phyllis Lauren said the words, "a binding contract," spoken into the quiet room. Phyllis stared at the raised glass. Her heart pounded against her ribs, a frantic, rhythmic drumbeat of terror and exhilaration. She had a choice to make: play it safe, walk away, and remain a pawn on Victor Newman's board. Or take Lauren Fenmore's hand, step into the darkness, and become the queen she was always meant to be. Slowly, deliberately, Phyllis raised her glass. Sally had been watching Billy for days with the kind of quiet concern that only grows when someone you care about keeps pretending they are fine. On the surface, he looked the way he always did when he was chasing control through work. Sharp, restless, mentally 3 steps ahead, speaking in clipped bursts, convincing himself that momentum was the same thing as purpose. But beneath that familiar drive, there was a strain in him that had become impossible to miss. He was pouring every ounce of himself into Chancellor Winters, into strategy meetings, damage control, board politics, and the endless pressure of proving that he could still be the man who held everything together. The problem was that the harder he clung to the professional side of his life, the more obvious it became that other parts of him were being abandoned. Sally saw it before he did. She saw it in the way he avoided certain phone calls, in the way Jill's name could pass through a conversation and leave behind a silence heavier than anger. There was history there, old resentment, old misunderstandings, old disappointment that never fully healed. Billy had convinced himself there would always be more time to fix it, more time to call, more time to explain, more time to stop being defensive and start being a son again instead of a man still fighting childhood wounds in a tailored suit. Sally did not approach him with accusation. That would have pushed him deeper into his shell. Instead, she spoke to the part of him that still wanted to believe he was better than his worst habits. She reminded him that success meant very little if it came at the cost of losing the people who had shaped him. She told him that family, no matter how fractured, carried a weight that no company, no title, and no public win could ever replace. She knew Billy well enough to understand that his distance from Jill was not indifference. It was fear disguised as stubbornness. He had spent so long feeling judged by her, measured against impossible standards, that he no longer knew how to stand in front of her without feeling like a failure. Yet Sally also understood something Billy kept refusing to face: unresolved pain does not freeze time. It only wastes it. And time, once it turns against someone, becomes the cruelest thing in the world. Then Genoa City was hit by the kind of news that rearranged every conversation in an instant. Jill's health had taken a serious turn. What began as worried whispers spread quickly into something far more alarming. Her condition was not a passing scare, not a dramatic misunderstanding that would dissolve by the next day. It was serious enough to shake the Abbott family and ripple outward through the city's power circles. The news landed like a blow. For Billy, it did not merely hurt. It ruptured something inside him. He had spent so much energy avoiding emotional vulnerability that he was completely unprepared for the force of guilt when it finally came. The possibility that Jill might be slipping away before he had said what needed to be said tore through all the justifications he had built. Suddenly, every missed call looked different. Every postponed visit became uglier. Every moment he had chosen business over reconciliation now carried the weight of a private betrayal. He was not grieving a death, not yet, but he was already grieving the version of himself he wished he had been before it was too late. That guilt transformed him almost overnight, but not in a clean or heroic way. Billy did not become calm, wise, or emotionally organized. He became raw. Torn between urgency and helplessness, he tried to hold everything at once and quickly discovered that life was no longer willing to let him perform that illusion. Chancellor Winters demanded his focus at the exact same moment Jill demanded his heart, and those two worlds were no longer compatible. On one side stood the company with all its fragile alliances, internal tensions, and looming decisions. On the other stood a mother whose health had become uncertain, whose presence in his life now felt painfully finite. Billy found himself pulled in opposite directions by loyalty, pride, fear, and obligation. The situation exposed something brutal but true. He could not be fully present in the boardroom while silently unraveling over Jill, and he could not sit at Jill's side without knowing the empire tied to her name was wobbling under pressure.